Hi everyone, welcome to this lecture on the micronutrients involved in metabolism. This is somewhat of a long lecture, so I've broken it up into two parts, and largely we're going to be covering all of the B vitamins in this lecture. So in particular, I just want you to, let me say that this is the first, at least as I'm presenting them, the first lecture specifically about some of our micronutrients. So things that I want you to pay attention to regarding the micronutrients: definitely know some of the functions of the nutrient, and in this case in particular, the role that these nutrients play, the B vitamins play in metabolism. And then also pay attention to absorption. We don't talk about absorption at this level with each of our nutrients, but you'll see some of the micronutrients in this lecture have specific notes about how they're absorbed. Also, whether or not they're stored in the body, how they might be transported in the body. And some of this is also a review of the introductory lecture on micronutrients. Also, please do pay attention to the food sources of the B vitamins, and then definitely specifically symptoms of deficiency and or toxicity. We'll start this lecture by introducing the concept coenzyme. And if you recall from our metabolism lecture, we introduced the concept of coenzyme and cofactor. So pretty much all of the processes that happen in our body happen via the work of enzymes, because any reaction that takes place requires energy to drive the reaction. And so what enzymes do is they effectively lower the energy that's required to get that reaction rolling. So they lower the activation energy. What we don't always talk about is the fact that enzymes don't work by themselves. They almost always work with a cofactor or a coenzyme. A coenzyme is a vitamin that basically attaches to what's called the apoenzyme, or the inactive form of the enzyme. And when the coenzyme attaches, then the enzyme becomes active, and we call it a holoenzyme. And it's at that point that the substrate can bind to the enzyme, and then the enzyme can help the reaction with that substrate occur. A cofactor is a mineral substance that binds to the apoenzyme and encourages the reaction to run. Two other little differences between cofactor and coenzyme. With the coenzyme almost always enhances the fit of the substrate, where the cofactor is usually binds in its own separate place and doesn't really enhance the fit of the substrate. Not something you necessarily need to retain, but so recognizing the difference between a coenzyme and a cofactor. Coenzyme is a vitamin and a cofactor is a mineral. And so we introduce this concept, or revisit this concept here, because we're going to see that effectively all of the B vitamins act primarily as coenzymes in the different processes of energy metabolism. And then again, all of the B vitamins play a role in these energy production pathways of metabolism. And then some of them also play a role in the biosynthetic pathways. That would be the anabolic part of metabolism. We'll start with thiamine, which is also known as vitamin B1. Thiamine is a coenzyme in the enzyme thiamine pyrophosphate, and you may remember seeing the abbreviation TPP if you read through some of the charts on your in the metabolism section of your book, or I think they were included also in the metabolism lecture that we did in week 8. So thiamine pyrophosphate functions in the decarboxylation reactions, which removes that carboxyl group from a molecule and thus releases carbon dioxide. We see this happening continually during glucose metabolism, particularly where pyruvate is converted to acetyl-CoA. And you can see with the carboxyl group it being removed, we're removing one carboxyl group, one carbon-containing group from pyruvate. thus reducing it from a 3-carbon molecule to a 2-carbon molecule, which we call acetyl-CoA. Thiamine pyrophosphate also plays a role in the pentose phosphate pathway. This is an alternative pathway for glycolysis. Again, not something that you need to be overly familiar with for this class, but the pentose phosphate pathway is utilized for things like making deoxyribose from glucose, and we use deoxyribose in DNA synthesis. We can also make ribose from glucose, which is used to make RNA, and then this pathway also helps us generate NADPH, which we'll visit next, is an enzyme that utilizes niacin and is used continually throughout the citric acid cycle. Some other roles of vitamin B1, this vitamin assists in nerve function and the synthesis and the regulation of various neurotransmitters. For each of these micronutrients, we're going to go through the recommended daily allowance. So this is what the National Academies of Sciences has set forth as the amount of each nutrient that should be taken in to ensure adequate health for roughly 97% of the population. So for women, it's 1.1 milligrams per day. For men, it's 1.2 milligrams per day. And maybe already you'll notice right out of the gate, we're talking milligrams, not grams. So again, a major differential between our macronutrients and our micronutrients. Because thiamine is so important in energy production, we're going to have an increased need during pregnancy and lactation. Some of the best food sources for thiamine are legumes, certain nuts and seeds, and whole grains. And then as far as we know to date, there is no real risk of toxicity with thiamine, particularly just because if we consume this nutrient in excess, the kidneys will help us excrete it in the urine. We do know that there are pretty severe risks of not having enough thiamine. So 2 major pathways to thiamine deficiency: excessive alcohol intake, and this is kind of 2-part. In one part, because if we're taking in excessive amounts of alcohol, there's no thiamine in alcohol, but there are calories. So it may inhibit consumption of other foods that could be containing thiamine. And then the secondary reason is that excessive alcohol intake interferes with our absorption of thiamine. The second cause of thiamine deficiency would be insufficient intake. So again, just not eating enough of thiamine-rich foods. Could also be related to having a diet that's high in processed foods. So where the thiamine might have been processed out and never replaced via enrichment. And then other factors like aging or living in poverty, not having enough money to buy foods that are going to supply adequate amounts of thiamine. And then with aging, much of our metabolic processes slow down, so there is the potential for decreased absorption of thiamine as we age. So the primary disease that we associate with thiamine deficiency is called beriberi. This is characterized by muscle weakness and nerve destruction. Some of the first signs are just weakness, irritability, headache, fatigue, depression, all of which are symptoms of the brain and nervous system. So again, this is true because of the role that thiamine plays in brain and nervous system function. There are 2 forms of beriberi. There's dry beriberi and wet beriberi. Wet beriberi is characterized by edema as well as an enlarged heart and heart failure, whereas dry beriberi is there's no edema, but you'd see more of the brain and nervous system degeneration. And then there's a secondary disease, not secondary, but there's a second disease associated with thiamine deficiency, and that's called the Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome. This is generally caused by excessive alcohol intake and the malnutrition that would ensue from an overabundance of alcohol intake. And Wernicke-Korsakoff is characterized by mental confusion, staggering, and constant rapid eye movement, or even potentially paralysis of the eyes. Right, our second nutrient, micronutrient, is vitamin B2, which is riboflavin. Riboflavin is yellowish in color. So if you've ever taken a B complex supplement and noticed the color of your urine a few hours later, it probably has a pretty strong yellow hue, and that's most likely because there was more riboflavin in the B complex than your body needed, and so your body was excreting the riboflavin in your urine, and it gave off a yellowish color. In food, though, riboflavin tends to impart somewhat of a green or bluish color. And the word flavin means yellow in Latin, which is how this nutrient gets its name. So riboflavin, again, all of this is going to be metabolism related, so oxidation reduction reactions, or redox reactions, is where we see most of the riboflavin function. There are two enzyme systems in particular where riboflavin plays a role. That's the flavin mononucleotide enzyme and the flavin adenine dinucleotide enzyme. Both of these you might recall from the citric acid cycle and beta oxidation. They act as electron carriers, so FAD, for example, in the citric acid cycle, accepts the electrons and becomes FADH2. And then in the next step of metabolism, we enter the electron transport chain, and that's where FADH2 then donates those electrons to the electron transport chain, thus allowing us to produce ATP. Another role of riboflavin is its facilitation of ammonia removal during processing of amino acids. So remember, if we have excess amino acids beyond what we need, we can break them down either for we can convert them to fatty acid molecules or to glucose molecules, depending on whether they're glucogenic or ketogenic amino acids. And so if we convert them to either fatty acid or glucose, we're going to need to get rid of the amino group. That's what the deamination of amino acids is removing that amino group. And you might recall that we have to process that to ammonia and then to urea, which are all of which are toxic to us, but successively less toxic. And then we excrete the urea in our urine. And then lastly, riboflavin is also associated with 3 antioxidant systems. Those antioxidant systems are glutathione reductase, glutathione peroxidase, and xanthine oxidase. We will revisit glutathione peroxidase next week in week 10 when we learn about other micronutrients that play a more specific role in antioxidation. All right, recommendations for riboflavin intake, fairly similar to thiamine, 1.1 milligrams per day for women, 1.3 for men. Again, because of the major role in metabolic pathways, there's an increased need for women who are pregnant and or lactating. Food sources, whole grains, seaweed, almonds, soybeans, eggs, and less so cheese and organ meats. There is no known toxicity to excessive riboflavin intake. As we saw on the first slide for riboflavin, if we take this nutrient in excess amounts, the kidneys will readily excrete it for us. Deficiency of riboflavin is rare because it is so abundant in our food, but it can happen. Again, alcoholism is a major cause, as well as just insufficient intake. The primary disorder associated with riboflavin deficiency is ariboflavinosis, and this is characterized by shiny, smooth, inflamed tongue, which is glossitis. Also painful and sore mouths with some of those like cracks in the corners, which is angular stomatitis. Also inflamed and split lips, chelosis. And then clogging of the oil-producing glands in your skin, which is seborrheic dermatitis. And deficiency of riboflavin may actually make other vitamin deficiencies worse because of their interrelatedness in the metabolic pathways. All right, number 3, niacin. This is vitamin B3. Again, plays a role in redox reactions. In particular, we see nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, which is NAD. This helps in catabolic processes where we're making ATP, and in particular, it can help convert pyruvate to lactate when we're in anaerobic conditions. And then we have nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate, NADP, and this is crucial for biosynthesis, so making molecules like new fatty acids. Recommendations for niacin. So this is one of very few vitamins that we can actually manufacture in our bodies. We can make niacin from tryptophan if we have adequate tryptophan intake. So the RDA talks about niacin equivalents, which includes preformed dietary niacin as well as niacin that we derive from tryptophan. So for women, it's 14 milligrams of niacin equivalents per day, and for men, it's 16 milligrams of niacin equivalents per day. Again, increased need during pregnancy and lactation. And again, you'll see whole grains. So whole grains, again, in their true whole grain form, are an excellent source of our B vitamins, and it's through milling that we start to lose some of these nutrients in our food. And then as well, meats, fish, peanuts, mushrooms, and liver. You'll find that a lot of liver and other organ meats are actually great sources of our nutrients because that tends to be a place where animals store, micronutrients. Animals will store extra vitamins and minerals in their liver. In modern times, we don't eat a lot of organ meats, but historically that was like a prime food source when we would harvest or kill an animal, was to eat the organ meats, because we've known for a long time that that's where nutrients are stored. All right, niacin deficiency is pellagra, and this is characterized by redness around the neck and having very rough skin. And there are the 3 Ds that often characterize the symptoms of pellagra. This is dementia, diarrhea, and dermatitis. And then oftentimes there's potentially a 4th D, which is death. The cause of niacin deficiency is just dietary insufficiency. And just like we saw with B1 and B2, there's not usually a severe toxicity, but there can be some, which is different from B1 and B2. So there can be a little bit of overexposure to niacin, and that would be characterized by flushing, itching, and tingling. And in more severe cases, also toxicity to the liver and impaired glucose tolerance. We are unlikely to toxify our bodies with niacin except through over-supplementation. So generally it would be almost impossible to enter niacin toxicity just through eating real food, but it's through over-supplementation that we run the risk of toxicity. Okay, there's no B4 in particular, but there is B5, so pantothenic acid. This is a component of coenzyme A, which is a component of acetyl-CoA. And if you recall, in the basic metabolic process, we can convert glucose to pyruvate and then pyruvate to acetyl-CoA. So pantothenic acid is a major component of this molecule acetyl-CoA. And of course, acetyl-CoA is a critical component in our energy-producing pathways where we synthesize ATP, as well as our biosynthesis pathways like making fatty acids. Recommended intake for B5 is 5 milligrams per day for adults. You'll notice we're talking about adequate intake here, and you might recall that adequate intake is used when there was insufficient information to determine an estimated, the recommended dietary allowance or the estimated average requirement. So there's maybe less sound science behind adequate intake, but it gives us something to go by. Food sources for B5 include chicken and turkey, mushrooms, lentils, sunflower seed, seaweed, and beef. Deficiency of B5 is pretty rare, again, only going to show up from inadequate intake, and symptoms would include irritability, restlessness, fatigue, apathy, malaise, sleep disturbances, nausea. And you'll notice that, again, kind of toggling back through all the B1 through 5 so far, a lot of the symptoms of deficiency relate to brain, neurological, and energy levels. Again, all metabolic pathways and energy production pathways. And risk of toxicity with B5 is very rare. All right, last one for this part 1 lecture. We'll look at biotin. So again, biotin is a coenzyme, and it functions in the following pathways: gluconeogenesis, fatty acid synthesis, beta oxidation, and DNA synthesis. But biotin can also help catalyze carboxylation reactions. So rather than decarboxylation, this is adding a carboxyl group onto a molecule. Dietary recommendations, again, we see adequate intake, 30 milligrams per day for adults. And food sources include cauliflower, liver, again, peanuts, and cheese. Deficiency is also rare. You can have deficiency from long-term consumption of raw egg whites because there's a compound in raw eggs that binds to biotin and makes it unavailable to us. There's not too many people out there who are pounding down raw egg whites every day, so it's not usually a concern for most people, but if you do like raw egg whites, be mindful that it could be interfering with your biotin absorption. Also, long-term use of anticonvulsant drugs interferes with biotin absorption. And then there's a rare genetic mutation that leads to a deficiency of the enzyme biotinidase, which converts biotin to an active form for us. And so in this case, it can lead to, on more mild symptoms, hair loss and rash, and on more severe symptoms, neurological disorders. You can supplement with biotin to account for this biotinidase deficiency. And there is no known toxicity with biotin intake, so no upper limit has been established.